Okay, let's keep going on. Today, recap book 3 as we move toward book 4. Little looking back where we've been. So, book 1, we get the central question, which is the what is it with regard to dikaiosune? What is justice? We get the proposal at the end of book 1 that in order to identify dikaiosune in the individual suke, in the individual soul, we need to first be able to identify dikaiosune within the polis. By blowing up the scale, we're able to have a better chance of identifying it when we need to reduce the scale. So book 2, we start to build the Callipolis. And we get this move from the city of pigs, the bare bones subsistence city, via luxury to the Callipolis. And now we're trying to identify where is dikaiosune, where is justice within the Callipolis. Because if we could find it here, we're going to find it within the individual. Then, book 3, we start to talk about the education of the auxiliaries. We said that the auxiliaries were the class of citizen that is responsible for the well-being, for guarding the Callipolis, and Plato takes a central aim in their education. Why? Because if the auxiliary is not well educated, if the auxiliary is not trained and developed in a certain way, we risk these well-beings of the Callipolis. Toward that end, we said that when it came to the education of the auxiliary, what it is that we're trying to instantiate in them is 2 character traits. We're trying to instantiate temperance, and we're trying to instantiate courage. These are the 2 virtues that our auxiliaries need to have. The means by which this is achieved is via education. And given the time period, Plato is primarily concerned about education via literature and education via poetry. So we go through this project of censorship, trying to identify what is appropriate in terms of literature and in terms of poetry, so that the auxiliaries can have these character traits of temperance and courage. The 2 main fields that our auxiliaries are going to be studying is that of music and that of gymnastics. With the goal being that we're trying to strike a mean here. So this is where we want our auxiliary to be, between being brutish and being effeminate. And Socrates thinks here that these 2 disciplines, when had in good conjunction with one another, begin this process of of balancing out brutishness with femininity. Okay. Now, we move here at the end of book 3 to what is commonly referred to as the noble lie. And it is this myth that Plato, Socrates, Glaucon, and Adeimantus proposed that we're going to tell the citizens of the city so that we can get everyone on board. Because Socrates is genuinely concerned that even though the Callipolis is structurally and philosophically sound, he's concerned that there will be a lack of buy-in. So we're going to have a fable. that we tell everyone. And the question we need to ask ourselves here is, what is the role of myth? What is the role of propaganda within the Callipolis? So very briefly, I want to discuss the noble lie, and then move on to book 4. So the way the noble lie is supposed to go is Socrates, Glaucon, and Adeimantus propose that we're going to be telling the citizens of the Callipolis that all of them were born of the earth. As such, all citizens, all people of the Callipolis are siblings with one another. The idea there is that by being siblings, you hopefully minimize strife and enmity. And when they were made by the gods of the earth, they were imbued with one of 3 metals. Some were imbued with gold, some were imbued with silver, and some were imbued with a mixture of copper and iron. And these metals that are imbued in the citizens of the Callipolis are directly related, they directly correlate to the role that they're going to have within the Callipolis. So those with gold in them are the best, and as such will be our guardians. Recall here that at the partway through book 3, Socrates shifts his language from calling the warrior class guardians. We used to call them guardians, but then he moves to calling them auxiliaries. So the guardians here are the true rulers of the Callipolis. They are what we will later see Socrates call in about book 7, the philosopher kings. Silver, those imbued with silver, are our auxiliaries. Those are the ones that we just spent all of book 3 talking about their education. And those imbued with copper or iron are our craftspeople. Okay. Now, insofar as part of the noble lie, insofar as all of them were born of the earth, where we can traditionally expect, Socrates says, that if 2 parents of copper have a child, that child will be of copper as well. But there is room for upward mobility. Not something that's earned, it's just something by chance. And what Socrates is focused on here is, I take it, trying to see the temperament of individuals. Trying to see who, kind of like in the same way a dog breeder can tell which dogs are going to make good, seeing eye dogs, and which dogs are just going to make really good pets. In that same way, those who are structuring the Callipolis, their job is to identify who has the requisite character traits, who has the requisite temperament to be within the upper 2 echelons, with everyone else just kind of falling into copper and iron. Now, even though this is a class structure within the Callipolis, Socrates thinks, and we're going to talk about this here before, that what unifies the entire Callipolis is the kaiosune. That is, it is justice. The entire city is just because there's harmony. So even though there is a class structure within the Callipolis, it is not a class structure that is grounded in and breeds discontent. There is no class uprising. There's no proletariat versus the bourgeois in this society. There is no the untouchables revolting against those who are not untouchable. Okay, using contemporary world examples. Rather, there is a harmony within this society. This brings us to book 4. And now that we're in book 4, Socrates is moving past the education of the guardians, moving past the noble lie, and we're moving toward the identification of dikaiosune. Remember, the goal right now has been to locate dikaiosune within the Callipolis. Because once we find it there, we can then find it in the individual. And toward doing this, Socrates is going to identify 4 virtues. This word for virtues is the same exact word that we saw Aristotle use in the Ethics, aratai, the plural, arete, the singular. So it's the same exact concept that we saw Aristotle talking about, but whereas Aristotle provides us a non-exhaustive list of moral virtues and an exhaustive list of intellectual virtues, Plato is going to provide us simply 4 virtues. And unlike Aristotle, who's going to think that every agent needs to instantiate these different virtues, Socrates thinks that the virtues are relative to the different classes we're talking about. So our 4 virtues are wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. Or as they are in the Greek, Sophia for wisdom, Andrea for courage, Sophrosune, temperance, and the one we've been most interested in, dikaiosune, in the case of justice. Now, if we were thinking along Aristotelian lines, we would expect to see that every agent is supposed to instantiate all these virtues, and they're all governed by phronesis, practical wisdom, the intellectual virtue, the ability to pick out how we're supposed to behave in particular situations. This is what we would expect from Aristotle. Socrates doesn't do this, though. Socrates doesn't think that every single agent is going to have the same exact virtues. So, recalling our members are classes of citizens. We have our guardians. We have our auxiliaries. And then we have our craftspeople. Every single, well, with the exception of craftspeople, even they're going to have one. They're going to have virtues that directly correlate to them. The guardians, the virtue that is indicative of the guardians is wisdom. The virtue that is indicative of the auxiliaries is courage. And then both temperance and justice are virtues that are to be instantiated by everyone. However, the means by which they are instantiated or represented by everyone differs compared to that of the guardians and the auxiliaries. Note that the craftspeople don't have their own specific virtue. And I take it the reason the craftspeople don't have a specific virtue is because the craftspeople in many ways are a class by negation. There is no totiein eini, there is no essence what it is to be when it comes to being a craftsperson. Rather, being a craftsperson is a definition by negation. That is, what it is to be a craftsperson is simply not to be an auxiliary, nor is it to be a guardian. So in our kind of contemporary liberal Western minds, this sounds like the craftspeople are the bottom of the barrel. And while certainly Socrates does not think that the craftsperson is responsible in the same way and as integral to the structuring of the Callipolis as the guardians and the auxiliaries are. Nevertheless, they do play an important role in the Callipolis because it is the craftspeople who are responsible for keeping the Callipolis up and running. It is the craftspeople who are responsible for being the farmers, for being the cobblers, for being the ones that produce what needs producing within the Callipolis so that the Callipolis can run. So even though they're not responsible for the administration of the Callipolis, and as a result they lack any particular virtue with that regard, they're nevertheless the ones that are responsible for just managing the day-to-day of the Callipolis. Now, focusing now on the guardians and the auxiliaries, I want to focus in on the individual virtues that they are supposed to instantiate. We already saw with the auxiliaries that the reason we expect our auxiliaries to be courageous is because of the role that they fulfill. The auxiliaries are supposed to be the ones who defend the Callipolis, who acquire new land for the Callipolis as needed. They are the guard dog for the Callipolis. As such, what it is to be a good auxiliary is to be courageous. So note here, there is a bit of bleed over from Platonic thought into what will later be Aristotelian thought. Plato is very much concerned with the notion of essence, of what it is to be something. Even though Plato is going to understand essence in terms of definitions, unlike Aristotle, who is going to not understand it in terms of definitions, he's going to understand it in terms of form. Nevertheless, there is this thought that there is a particular feature or a particular character trait that makes something a particular kind of thing. That is, there is, in this case, one virtue that makes a guardian a guardian. What it is to be a guardian, for Plato, is to have the virtue of wisdom. And when we think of this word wisdom, we tend to think of kind of sage advice or kind of a certain level of sage understanding. That is most certainly not what Socrates has in mind here. What it is to be wise is directly related. What it is to have wisdom for Plato is very much the same thing that it was to have wisdom and comprehension. For Aristotle. That is the same way that for Aristotle we were concerned about grasping indemonstrables and then building those indemonstrables up to demonstrables. In that same way, this is what wisdom is for Plato. It is these two virtues. Wisdom has nothing to do with sage advice. Rather, it has everything to do with academic understanding. And we'll see this later in books 5 and 6. But Plato is going to think that with academic understanding comes the ability to govern well. So in many ways, what wisdom is, it is the essence, or the to tien anai, the what it is to be a guardian. And the same thing applies for courage. What it is to be an auxiliary is to instantiate the virtue of courage. This is why there is no particular virtue for the craftspeople, because there is nothing that it is to be a craftsperson. There is no defining feature, defining virtue that makes a craftsperson a craftsperson. Rather, the craftspeople are simply those who do not have wisdom, nor do they have courage. But now we get temperance and justice, and these are social virtues. Whereas wisdom and courage for Socrates are very much individual virtues, justice and temperance are social virtues. What temperance is, or sophrosune, is not desiring to move outside the appropriate boundaries. So in the Callipolis, like I said, there's harmony between these three groups of people. Part of what this harmony is, if we think of justice and temperance combining to make harmony, part of what this harmony is that no group of citizen, no class of citizen desires to be more or less than what they are. The crafts people don't want to be auxiliaries. They don't want to be guardians. The auxiliaries don't want to be crafts people or guardians. The guardians don't want to be auxiliaries or crafts people. Everyone desires to be where they are at because they notice what's best. But then we also have this virtue of justice, the one we've been most interested in. And what dikaiosune is, first Plato, is everyone actually staying in their lane. So whereas temperance is desiring to stay in your lane, desiring to do what is best for you relative to the kind of thing that you are, justice is actually doing it. So we see this move from desire to behavior. And we saw the same exact thing in Aristotle. In the same way for Aristotle, virtuous activity is first and foremost grounded in virtuous desire. What it is to be genuinely charitable for Aristotle is not just to give to charity, but it's to desire to give to charity. We see the same exact thing with Plato. In order for us to have the Callipolis, not only does everyone actually have to stay in their own lane, they have to want to. There has to be buy-in. So desire precedes behavior. And only when we have all four of these virtues does Plato think that we're going to have the Callipolis. But as interesting as the Callipolis is, remember, this was not the goal of Book 1 of the Republic. The goal of Book 1 of the Republic was to identify dikaiosune within the individual. We only started building the Callipolis because we were interested in trying to find dikaiosune within the individual. If we can't find it in the individual first and foremost, let's see if we can blow up the scale and identify it that way. And that's what the project is. But now, so let's compare. We have the agents. And then we have the Callipolis. Okay? We said that dikaiosune within the, we can keep that. We said that dikaiosune within the Callipolis is everyone staying in their own lane. Now, how then does that model over to dikaiosune within the individual? And to answer that, what Socrates is going to propose is a tripartite division of the psyche, or a tripartite division of the soul. In the same way I said with Descartes, don't get hung up on this word soul. It's not a religious word here. The word here in Greek is psyche, it's where we get our word psychology. And very much the psyche, or the soul, is just the mind. It's the non-physical thing that makes you you. So this tripart division of the psyche, to use Descartes' language, this is not a real distinction. That is, we're not carving out reality at the sinews or at the joints. We're not identifying different ontologically independent things. Rather, what we're doing here is identifying different characteristics. So it is a modal, at best, distinction that we're making here. And the three different parts of the soul, or the psyche, that Socrates is going to identify is that of reason, desire, let's put it this way. Reason, spirit, and appetite. Okay. And he doesn't do it in this dialogue, but in a different dialogue, a dialogue called the Phaedrus. Plato provides a similar tripartite division of the psyche, but in here he gives the analogy of a charioteer. That is, someone who drives a chariot. And the charioteer is composed of three living things. You have the person who drives the chariot. You have horse 1, and then you have horse 2. Okay. And the way Plato in that dialogue fleshes this out is that the person who drives the chariot is representative or analogous to reason. They're the human being. They're the ones who can make the decisions. A chariot that is running well has the person in charge, not the animals. But within your two horses, you're going to have different temperaments. You're going to have one horse that's more unruly, more prone to distractions, and then you're going to have another horse that is a little bit more gung-ho. It's got a little bit more giddy up in them. Horse 1, this is our bold horse. This is the one that this is the horse that has to be the first one out of the gate. It has to have something to do. This is the horse that is likened to spirit. The Greek word for spirit is thumos. Thumos in some works, particularly Homeric works, gets translated as rage. But that's not quite how Plato means it here. It's a kind of a boldness, a vigor of spirit. That's what thumos is. Horse 2, the one that's constantly distracted and kind of wild, is then related to appetite. And in a well-structured chariot, the person knows the temperament of her horses. She knows which horse is going to lead astray because it's distracted, or maybe it's cowardly, and which horse is going to pull the other horse along. So in the well-structured chariot, the person is in charge. And the person makes use of the bold horse. The person makes use of the horse that has thumos so that she can control the horse that is either unruly or cowardly or what have you. we see the same exact thing with, you guys are too young, but you guys aren't college or maybe in the military or something. So when you go through something in the military like basic training, they assign amongst the cohorts someone who's going to be in charge at the peer level. And that's the person that the people who are running basic training are going to use to control everyone else. If you've ever run a race, like a cross-country group race, the coach knows who to put in front of the race and who to put in the back of the line so that you can get everyone in the middle moving along. Okay? The same concept here applies to the tripart division of the soul. We have a part of our soul that is rational. This part of the soul, what Socrates calls the logos, is that which must be in charge. The well-organized human being is led by reason. She is not led by her emotions. She's not led by her desires. She's led purely by reason. But she knows how to make use of thumos. She knows how to make use of spirit in order to control her appetite, in order to control her desires. The desires are inevitable. But in the well-organized mind, logos makes use of thumos to control appetite. Okay. So now, what we can say dikaiosune is in the agent is a harmonious or a well-structured suke. What it is to have justice within the individual is for the different parts of the mind to be organized in such a way that it's constructive of the whole individual, such that reason is in charge and makes use of thumos to control appetite. A unharmonious soul is one where this paradigm is messed up. Traditionally, it's understood as one where appetite is in charge, where one is led by their emotions and what they desire, as opposed to being led by reason. The same thing, an unharmonious suke could be one where spirit's in charge. It's the one where this person is very vigorous and gung-ho, but they're not being led by reason. Okay? So this is the emotional person. This is the stupid high school boy who thinks he's invincible. Okay? This is how in many ways we can understand this contemporarily. So where we're at the end of book 4 is we have identified what dikaiosune is within the Kallipolis and what it is within the agent. We've in many ways achieved the goal of book 1, because this right here was the whole foundation of book 1. Book 1 was trying to answer this question, and Socrates did it in book 4. But you got 6 more books, and he's got to have something to do here. Books 5 through 7 are traditionally seen as a divergence. We start to get to some of the central analogies of the Republic, and we get into this discussion of Platonic metaphysics and epistemology, but in many ways they are tangentially related to the main concepts of the Republic. And then we'll come back to the central topics in books 8 through 10. But we're going to go ahead and pause there.